In recent weeks, there has been a surge of publications about Allatra with ominous headlines. Yet, do you know how many articles have been released? In the first 2 weeks alone, 250 of such articles emerged in the media landscape of just two countries, the Czech Republic and Slovakia, and within 3 weeks, the count reached 400. Doesn't that surprise you? 400 identical, one-sided publications, appearing in sync as if at someone's command, all echoing the rhetoric of leaders of the Russian pro-religious organization, resurgence. Today, I'd like to explain the reason behind this. Why 400 defamatory publications came out within 3 weeks, and why Allatra is being targeted so harshly. Take a look at the timeline and see for yourselves. For those who want to dig deeper, rather than be misled by disinformation from resurgence agents, the official Allatra website presents our stance, the truth about us. I invite you to visit our website, look through it, familiarize yourselves with it, and come to your own conclusions objectively, without resurgence's bias and manipulative rhetoric. In short, the primary goal of Allatra volunteers is to study climate change. Additionally, Allatra's work is focused on preserving and protecting human rights and freedoms. Let's address one of the most widely spread false accusations against Allatra. Capitalizing on topics resonant with public opinion, resurgence agents accuse us of being pro-Russian, cynically omitting that at this very moment, our participants in Russia are facing severe persecution initiated by this particular Russian pro-religious association, resurgence. Those Allatra participants who reside in Russia are detained, subjected to fabricated criminal cases, tortured, and imprisoned. While these innocent people are being jailed under resurgence's instigation, in other countries, resurgence agents orchestrate public harassment of Allatra participants, following the command from their Russian supervisors. Just imagine the extreme cynicism and lack of compassion for innocent people caught in the repressive machine of those who are behind the agents recruited by the aforesaid Russian pro-religious organization in our countries. The most cynical and sordid point is that they aren't working for Russia. They are working for resurgence that has its own ideology and objectives. Resurgence has practically seized power in Russia, or at least controls a significant part of it. Its ideology is not only becoming the official ideology of the Russian Orthodox Church, ROC, but is also influencing the Russian state itself. That is why resurgence agents are so active here. They are facing exposure, and they're afraid that the world will discover the truth. This explains the 400 publications over such a short period of time. They believe that the more they tarnish our name, the fewer people will learn about their activities and the propaganda resurgence disseminates, paving the way towards a totalitarian Nazi regime. All their publications are anti-cult in nature, but for Russian agents, anti-cult activities are merely an umbrella that covers their true deeds, just to conceal their true motives and goals. So, what is the pro-religious organization, resurgence, operating out of Russia? Let's begin with the real identity of the leader of this international criminal organization, who fancies himself a Führer, Alexander Dworkin. However, he deserves credit. He is quite talented and brilliant, given what he has accomplished. To fully understand the situation, let's turn to the history of Nazi ideology in Hitler's Germany. Few people know that without Walter Kunneth, head of the Apologetic Center, Nazism would not have existed, and Hitler's party would have been just one of many in Germany. Kunneth specifically used methods of fighting undesirable organizations to build Nazi Germany. It wasn't Hitler who did that, but precisely Kunneth, with his manic tendencies and desire for absolute power. For more details, please look at the screen. The key players in the chain of Nazi ideology's succession were Walter Kunneth, Friedrich Wilhelm Hack, Johannes Agard, and Alexander Dvorkin. Today, the Russian pro-religious organization Ratseers, led by Alexander Dvorkin, is the immediate successor of the actual Nazi ideologists, who transformed NSDAP into a cruel Nazi regime, taught it manipulation tactics, and turned the Gestapo into a tyrannical repressive force, targeting millions of dissidents. Doesn't this remind you of anything happening nowadays? Going back to the disinformation spread by Ratseers agents targeting Alatra in Czech and Slovak media. If we analyze the flood of 400 recent defamatory publications about Alatra in the Czech and Slovak information space, we can see not only identical content, but also a short list of authors and media outlets that publish those articles. Think about it. Such a large volume of data, 400 articles, were prepared within a short span of just a few weeks. The official Alatra website offers many hours of video materials in our stance. However, as we can see, those who promote Ratseers rhetoric have no goal to present an objective, comprehensive picture, but only uninformative, one-sided, and highly emotional. That is, manipulative articles, with a presence of the key Nazi manipulative method of dehumanization, which is perfectly in line with the rhetoric of the pro-religious Russian organization Ratseers. 10 years ago, on websites controlled by the Russian Orthodox Church, under whose blessing Dvorkin operates, and on sources affiliated with the official website of the Center for Religious Studies in the name of Hieromartyr Irenaeus, Bishop of Lyons, the first defamatory publications targeting Alatra appeared. The articles were written using manipulative Nazi methods of dehumanization, demonization, and defamation. Simply put, the methods which are used to marginalize an unwanted group in society. Since then, the smear campaign and persecution of Alatra has continued. For 10 years, we've been targeted by discrimination, persecution, and dehumanization. Recently, similar rhetoric has surfaced in the information spaces of the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Look at the screen. These are the articles published 10 years ago on the websites of Ratseers leaders, Alexander Dvorkin and Archpriest Alexander Novopashin, Vice President of Ratseers, years 2015 and 2019. And here are the articles that have recently appeared on Czech and Slovak media outlets. As you see, they are in many ways identical in terms of using methods of manipulation over your consciousness and in semantic content. Another interesting point, when Ratseers started dehumanizing Alatra, some of the initial key accusations in defamatory articles were built on misrepresentation of information from the fiction books by Anastasia Novik. 10 years later, we see exactly the same rhetoric in European countries, for instance, in Slovakia. Here is another example of the rhetoric delivered by Ratseers Vice President Alexander Novopashin. It is fully in line with how the Nazis dehumanized the Jewish people. In the example of this publication by Nova Passion, zoomorphic metaphors are used to reinforce dehumanization, such as a wolf in sheep's clothing. Other rat seers agents compare participants of the movement to Putin's rats. Let's recall how Nazi propaganda routinely used zoomorphic metaphors to deprive Jews of a human status. Nazis compared Jews to lice, rats, and other animals that evoke disgust. These methods were used by the Nazis to overcome the moral barriers that stood in the way of mass extermination of undesirable people and organizations with other people's hands. At a certain point, this kind of propaganda went so far that the dehumanizing narratives of the Nazis began to be carried out simultaneously with open calls to kill Jews. For example, to exterminate Jews as deadly bacteria. I have given the facts of persecution of the Allatra movement by rat seers agents. However, you shouldn't think that Allatra is their only target. Rat seers has a universal instruction manual targeting many unwanted organizations, including Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, Scientologists, and even commercial companies like Amway, Zepter, and others. They can put yellow stars on anyone if it grants them access to your consciousness in order to skillfully manipulate it to their own advantage. Rat seers' guidelines and blacklists of sects and cults closely align with Nazi blueprints for genocidal persecution of Jews and other unwanted groups. In Hitler's Germany, blacklists were submitted to Hitler by the head of the Apologetic Center, Walter Kunneth. The same absolutely identical lists are currently maintained by rat seers headed by Dvorkin, a follower and favorite student of Kunneth's disciples. Everything is written by the same hand, the hand of the builders of Nazism. Let me give you an example of dehumanization and demonization of Jehovah's Witnesses by rat seers leader Alexander Dvorkin. And now let's recall that Jehovah's Witnesses were actually among the first to end up on blacklists in Hitler's Germany. The ban of Jehovah's Witnesses is also mentioned in this book. If Hitler was the Führer for Nazis, who serves as a Führer to their present-day followers? To answer this question, let's think again. Where is the ideological center of modern Nazi adherents? Who is their leader and source of inspiration? The answer is obvious. Their new Führer is Alexander Dvorkin. This fact speaks for itself. There is historical evidence, direct proof, and unmistakably identical methods, along with one key element, uninterrupted continuity from the Nazi times to nowadays. Thus a question arises. Will Europe again remain silent as it did in the 1930s, before World War II? Why do we allow democracy to be destroyed and close our eyes to the infiltration of Nazism? Now I appeal to you, journalists, lawyers, prosecutors, and all those who are watching this video. Tell me, were Nazism and genocide legal or not? And what is currently being done against the participants of the Allatra movement and against numerous other organizations, against millions of people before your eyes? Is that legal? Before the eyes of those who are obliged to protect democracy and our rights and freedom? Are the actions of agents sent by the Russian pro-religious organization rat seers legal or not? Is that freedom of speech? Are they journalists? Or are they individuals who use methods absolutely similar to those of the Nazis, and whose actions lead to negative outcomes for the people, whom they publicly dehumanize and mark with yellow stars, now, in front of everyone, almost 80 years after Nazism was defeated. So did we defeat Nazism, or is it defeating us? That's the main question for today. Isn't it Nazism when some people use Nazi propaganda and replicate it among each other? Give us an explanation. What is this? Is it a fight against sects and cults? Anti-cultism? After all, Nazi ideologists also started their activities under the pretext of fighting sects. And what was the outcome? Genocide. Millions of human lives were lost. Is what is happening today before our eyes lawful? Is it lawful to suppress and dismantle democracy and violate people's rights? Why do some individuals regard themselves as gods and arbiters of fate, while others are treated as mere subhumans having no rights? Who are those self-proclaimed gods? The next master race. Why is there so much disinformation coming from the Russian pro-religious organization Resurgence, led by their self-appointed Führer, Dvorkin, in our European countries? And why has no one held them accountable for the sufferings of millions of people and for numerous deaths over the 30 years of their destructive Nazi activities? We all support the idea that Nazism should never rise again. Yet, we currently see it not only raising its head, but openly operating, just like in Germany during the Nazi era. It is operating within mass media, in the offices of politicians, and among those responsible for protecting democracy. Nazism is already ruling there. And where exactly? Here, in Europe, in democratic states. If it was illegal back then and resulted in the genocide of 6 million people, then why are the actions now unfolding against law-abiding, honest Slovak and Czech citizens who pose no threat to anyone considered to be legal? Here are articles related to the criminal case involving Kristina Tsirakova and other journalists of the coordinated network of agents of the Russian pro-religious organization Resurgence, which uses methods that manipulate your consciousness and promote the ideological rhetoric of their Führer Dvorkin. Journalists who are in one way or another connected with each other and affiliated with Resurgence through their overseers fear no one and openly attack the people of Slovakia, the Czech Republic, and other nations at ease, without secrecy, and in doing so they feel victorious. They have already dismantled the pillars that restrained Nazism and upheld democracy. And now let me say once again, they openly and publicly mark people with yellow stars. Yet none of them has been held accountable to this day. Dissatisfaction is expressed over law enforcement interference with journalists, which these journalists claim to be a violation of rights and freedoms, including freedom of expression and the right to information. But tell me, is it freedom of expression and the right to information when journalists openly incite hatred against innocent people, publish their addresses, names, places of work, dehumanize them in the eyes of the public, and openly discriminate against them with the label of sect or cult? What about the consequences of these coordinated media campaigns? When people lose their jobs and their status as human beings, being publicly portrayed as non-humans or supposedly cultists, when they receive threats in comments and aggressive messages daily, or in cases like that of Jehovah's Witnesses, when parents are imprisoned, their children are sent to orphanages and then into sexual slavery. Is this freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom of expression? And when journalists influence politicians to pass anti-democratic laws that strip away legal rights, isn't that Nazism? Is that freedom? If you consider such actions to be lawful, or if you agree with Mrs. Sirokova, who believes that she committed no crime, it is worth recalling that during the Nuremberg trials, one of the defendants was found guilty solely for propaganda, not for any physical acts of murder. Julius Streicher was convicted for his so-called educational activities, which amounted to informational terror attacks. This man, Streicher, claimed he was merely educating and did not consider his actions to be criminal, anti-human, or inhumane. So what is the charge for such educational activities? Let's look at the Nuremberg trials. All the charges culminated in Streicher's death sentence. To reiterate, Streicher insisted he had called for the extermination of the Jewish people, but not in a literal sense. Likewise, those who pretend to be fighting against cults and sects brand organizations as cancerous tumors, knowingly implying their eradication. Streicher claimed he issued orders to demolish synagogues purely for architectural reasons. Doesn't this resemble the rhetoric of those journalists who, under the guise of freedom of speech and journalistic ethics, create conditions for the genocide of innocent people in their still democratic countries? Their main arguments were just informing the public. We're not anti-cultists. Of course not. Maybe it's time to call things by their proper names. Nazism is a belief in the superiority of some people over others, seen as inferior. Those journalists are the ones promoting and reviving this horrific ideology of superiority, all while pretending to be fighting cults or protecting society from the so-called dangerous sects. They are the ones who take up a new, modern yellow star, the label of cultist or sectarian, and attach it to anyone indicated by the ideological leader of the Russian pro-religious organization, Resurgence. Now, take a closer look. Sirokova, who is connected to the new Führer, Dvorkin, and his pro-religious organization, Resurgence, what does she say? I'm just a journalist. But why was Streicher prosecuted? Isn't this exactly what she is doing? It surely is. She's doing it along with her accomplices in this criminal international organization created by the new Führer Dvorkin. In fact, the public has long noted the similarity between her actions and Nazism. Back in the Nazi time, no one stopped it, just as no one is stopping it now. 100 years ago, Nazi ideologists also began with actions that conveniently paved the way to start eliminating undesirable groups and individuals by compiling blacklists of cults and sects. Once again, I urge you to pause and take a close look at this screenshot. Do you see it? Back then, too, it started with anti-cultism and ended in Nazism. However, Nazis weren't judged for anti-cult activities. They were judged for promoting Nazism and committing crimes against peace and humanity, the very acts that agents of the pro-religious organization Resurgence have been engaging in for the past 30 years. Sirokova and other agents of this Russian pro-religious organization are now doing the same. They claim to be informing the public about cults and sects, but in reality, they mark people with yellow stars, disregarding all international and civil rights. The actions of Sirokova and other agents in this network aren't just similar to Streicher's actions. In many respects, they are identical and lead to the same results. The Nazis, however, were held accountable, while these Nazi-like criminals are repeating the same crimes 80 years later before everyone's eyes. This is the issue of democracy versus Nazism. Is Streicher's trial an issue preclusion or a precedent? What is it? An issue preclusion or a precedent? When we're talking about the real Nazism of Dworkin, in many ways it mirrors the Nazism established by Kunith. Take a look, compare, and decide for yourselves. Sirokova's and Dworkin's actions are nearly identical to those of Kunith. So, should this be considered a precedent or issue preclusion regarding our future in democracy versus Nazism? One of the latest discrediting articles about the Allatra movement was published on November 4th on Seznam Zprávy. I believe I should mention this fact in this video, as it is yet another dose of manipulation, fabrication, and defamation, employing Nazi methods of dehumanization, and also because a telephone conversation preceded that article. On October 29th, I received a call from the author of this article, Kristina Sirokova, and I'd like to mention a few points from this conversation. I asked her if she had watched our forums, or at least the Impact documentary, and she said, no. I won't watch 8.5 hours of conspiracy. What does this indicate? That her publications about Allatra are commissioned materials from her overseers at the Russian pro-religious organization Ratseers and promote exclusively Ratseers rhetoric. When a journalist serves Ratseers, there is no room for an independent approach, journalistic ethics, truth, objectivity, or reason, and certainly no place for democracy or human rights. If Ratseers' ideology is Nazism, what should we expect from Ratseers' agents, their accomplices, and those involved in implementing their rhetoric and objectives under the anti-cult guise of supposedly fighting cults and sects? It is generally evident that journalists involved in anti-cult activities, who are actually disseminating disinformation from the Russian pro-religious organization Ratseers and promoting Nazi ideology, do not investigate or dig deep into the subjects they cover. Why would they do that when there are directives, funding, and orders from their Ratseers overseers? This is a tightly controlled organization, headquartered in Russia. Their objective is destabilization, to create chaos that they will later attempt to seize control over. I will also note publicly available facts about her other anti-cult publications. In addition to branding unwanted organizations with the dehumanizing labels cults and sects, Kristina Sirokova systematically criticizes public authorities and the government and broadcasts topics that divide and provoke conflict in society, which cannot but destabilize our country as a whole. Similar things are being done by people involved in fighting against cults and sects in other countries, including Russia, specifically in Ratseers. This cannot be a coincidence, because it's a pattern indicating their true interests, a single control center and coordination of their actions. Those who wrote defaming articles are all interconnected, including Jakub Jal, Ivana Škodová, as well as some Czech and Slovak journalists involved in this anti-democratic, anti-cult activity. One of the key personalities in this network of agents is Zdeněk Vojtěšek, whom they repeatedly refer to. Yet who is Zdeněk Vojtěšek? I'll give just a small reference, but I emphasize that this Czech so-called cult fighter has repeatedly put his hand to the dehumanization campaign against the Allatra movement. While at the Johannes Agar's Information Center in Denmark in the early 1990s, Zdeněk Wojtyšek met with many other Johannes Agar's disciples who attended this center back then. At about the same time, Alexander Dvorkin from Russia also visited this center at the invitation of Johannes Agar. 1993 was the year of the establishment of the Society for the Study of Sex and New Religious Movements in the Czech Republic. When it was registered on July 16, 1993, its key figures were the chairman Tomáš Novotný, deputy chairman Prokop Remeš, and press secretary Zdeněk Wojtyšek. In the same year, 1993, Alexander Dvorkin founded his Center for Religious Studies in the name of Irenaeus of Lyons in Russia. The center emerged after Dvorkin's visit to the Information Center in Aarhus, Denmark, at the invitation of Johannes Agar. In the current context, agents of the Russian pro-religious organization resurgence claim that Allatra is pro-Russian. But who are they really? When they work directly for resurgence and get activated according to their orders, employing Nazi manipulative tactics and rhetoric? In this video, you've seen articles from resurgence, their methodical materials, and similar rhetoric in Czech and Slovak media, as well as from the so-called anti-cultists. Who is truly working for a Russian organization here? The answer is clear. Today, all anti-cult rhetoric originates from Russia, where resurgence is based. In Russia, human rights no longer exist. Everyone is labeled as extremists, sectarians, or rascals, all jailed, and all people are treated as second-class citizens unless they submit to the ROC. Despite this, their agents here, in violation of all democratic principles and human rights, continue to label us and many other organizations and hundreds of people from various nations and religions as sectarians or cultists, repeating the rhetoric of the pro-Russian, pro-religious organization resurgence. Here is the Constitution. Here are the laws. Why is Nazism, which in the past resulted in the Holocaust and slaughtered 6 million Jews and tens of millions of people worldwide, resurging today here in the Czech Republic and Slovakia? Among the citizens of our countries, there are directly recruited agents of the Russian pro-religious organization and resurgence, under the leadership of Alexander Dvorkin and Alexander Novopashin. They are working to re-establish Nazism, an ideology of superiority of some groups over others. They are implementing this goal using the same Nazi methods as their resurgence supervisors, direct successors of Nazi ideologists. Has anyone wondered why they brainwash people using direct and indirect suggestion techniques? It's not just lying and manipulation. It is violence against a human personality, a violent replacement of one's worldview. This is exactly what happened in Germany, where intellectually educated people were artificially transformed into Nazis. Today, you are being brainwashed. You are being forced to destroy the laws that are supposed to protect you. Why? Look at what happened first in eastern Ukraine when Russia occupied the Donetsk and Luhansk regions in 2014. They legalized anti-cult narratives and a single dominant religion, the Russian Orthodox Church, on a constitutional level. Later, the international community condemned this, and they had to amend the constitution and soften it. But the essence didn't change. They had enough time to strengthen the hegemony of one religious organization, the ROC. Now let's examine the correlation. Persecution of the Allatra movement in Europe, particularly in the Czech Republic and Slovakia, intensified at the same time that the persecution in Russia against us became extremely harsh. In other words, resurgence says that the movement must be destroyed, and their agents here start persecuting us, discrediting us, and applying Nazi methods against us, the same methods as those used against the Jewish people and other groups in Nazi Germany, aimed at dehumanization and establishment of Nazism. Here are the laws and democracy, but we see that they are not being followed. In fact, their actions only benefit the Russian pro-religious organization Rat Seers. They don't even benefit the executors themselves, because such actions destroy democracy, destabilize their country, and demoralize their people. But this is happening, although it should have been stopped right away 30 years ago with the very first publication. But it didn't stop, and what we see now is horrifying. If they had stopped back then, there would be no opportunity for the Russian Association Rat Seers to promote its rhetoric, its propaganda, and recruit new agents today. Once again, here is a picture with a timeline of the release of the discrediting campaign against Allatra over the past few weeks. How did it end? The prosecutors were demonstratively punished for trying to stand up for democracy. This is a terror attack. Intimidation of prosecutors so that others would be afraid and would not do this anymore, so that they would be afraid to defend democracy. In addition, the prosecutors were dismissed with a claim that anti-cultism doesn't exist. Yet what does anti-cultism have to do with it when we are talking about the revival of Nazism in favor of the Russian Rat Seers and its Führer Dvorkin? So is there no one to defend democracy now? What will you do with these facts? Close your eyes? Then you are criminals, complicit in building Nazism, everyone who closed their eyes. Democracy is being destroyed before our eyes while we are silent. Rat Seers has numerous victims, various organizations, many of whom have been persecuted for decades, yet they too are silent. They've been intimidated to the point of silence. So why do we speak? Because we know the truth. Because what we have been saying about climate for the past 10 years is now being confirmed. At the same time, the persecution against us is intensifying in many countries. We are being kicked out of work, our participants are being imprisoned in Russia, and criminal cases have been initiated in Ukraine through agents of the Russian Rat Seers. But Ukraine will figure it out. There is still democracy there. It's just that Rat Seers agents took advantage of the country's weakness during the war, while security agencies were busy. And still, despite the persecution, we continue to act. We regret only one thing, that we turned out to be right. We see how the climate is changing, and it's the worst possible outcome. We truly wish that we had been wrong in our calculations, that our formula would not align with reality. Today, we are more afraid than anyone because we know what tomorrow will bring. And in this time of climate change, many people are listening to Rat Seers propaganda, even among those living in democratic countries. You are being manipulated by the priests from Rat Seers and those scoundrels who hide behind the guise of journalists, at the same time violating your rights, destroying democracy, and sowing discord among you. This is happening while we are saying that wars and conflicts must end before the climate ultimately destroys us all. And this is not about politics. We've been saying this for 10 years. Back when serious climate change was already underway, we said that disasters were serious, but people were hardly dying. But we also said that after a little time, more and more people would be dying from climate disasters. And this is happening now. This is a natural process. This is math. So, the only thing we're guilty of is understanding math? You can see the growing climate chaos for yourselves. Right now in Spain, there are floods, tornadoes, and hail. All that was missing were earthquakes and volcanoes for a complete picture. It all fell on them. Will this expand? It will, if we don't have the wisdom to stop it. And do we have any progress in terms of finding a solution for this? No. Instead of doing what Allatra has always been doing, we are forced to fight for the rights of each person in this world and defend democracy. We have nothing to be ashamed of, and we fear nothing, because we know exactly what's going to happen in the coming years. All our arguments are not something we made up. Behind every graph are institutes and very serious scientists. We simply took their research and data and connected it into a whole. We were being laughed at. And now, guys, you see what's happening in reality. Do you like what's happening now? For example, the death toll in Spain, or how we had destructive floods in the Czech Republic and Slovakia that caused so much grief? You don't like it. But you like to live in the present without understanding what will happen tomorrow. It's important to understand that earthquake dynamics are already approaching 6 on the Richter scale, whereas 5 used to be a rarity just a few years ago. Particular concern is raised by the increased frequency in deep focus earthquakes, because the consequences of such earthquakes are catastrophic. Not a single week goes by without a 6-magnitude earthquake at great depth. It's like dropping atomic bombs and wondering if they'll explode or not. Right now, we are in exactly the same situation. And what do earthquakes at such depths indicate? They indicate excessive energy. Now think about what will happen. What does this lead to? Meanwhile, Dvorkin and his international network of agents are building Nazism around the world, dreaming of global power. We've been saying for many years that an interdisciplinary commission needs to be created so that scientists can sit down at the same table. For the agents of rat seers, let me clarify, not with us. Scientists should not come to us, but so that they would sit down together to solve the problem, to start a dialogue among themselves. This is serious. This is important. And is there such a commission? No. Otherwise, what will you do with your families? How will you protect them? Will you listen to the Nazis who will tell you, everything's fine, adapt? While Scientologists, Baptists, or Allatra participants are to blame, and of course, they will scream that Allatra didn't protect you. But we haven't stopped talking about it for 10 years. If the agents of rat seers were rational people, they would be standing with us, shoulder to shoulder, but they follow orders from their leadership. It's like that person who protects their car from hail with their own body. While your brains are being washed, many of you are protecting them, protecting the agents of rat seers. And then they don't stop with their Nazi methods. They go further, recruiting agents, taking your property away, violating your rights, and carrying out onslaughts. Look at what is happening in Russia and other countries. How many more people have to suffer before society understands that Nazism has been revived in the world? Remember the Germans. They were highly intelligent and educated people. They gave humanity many great individuals, breakthroughs in technology, masterpieces in music. A highly educated nation. What did they become after falling prey to the manipulative methods of Walter Koenig's Apologetic Center, embracing the ideology of superiority, the ideology of Nazism? And now, this is being implemented again. For what? Who benefits from this? History repeats itself, but it shouldn't repeat itself. Nearly 100 years ago, Nazism began to emerge, including within the walls of the Apologetic Center, in the blacklists of undesirables maintained by this center. But should we repeat the spiral? And now I am addressing you, everyone who is against Nazism, everyone who supports preservation of democracy. Please share this video and pass this information to others. Yes, many believe it doesn't concern them. Just like many people in Germany, during the rise of Nazism, thought it didn't concern them, or that Nazism couldn't take root in their country. But this affects each and every one of us, just like climate change does. It directly concerns you. You don't even notice how you are being manipulated by the builders of Nazism from rat's ears. We will discuss this in other videos. But for now, please spread this. If you are in favor of democracy standing strong so that Nazism doesn't triumph, everyone must know and understand that Nazism has returned, and the question now is whether it will ultimately prevail. Let everyone make a conscious choice. Are they for Nazism or for democracy?